is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. NATO demands Russia withdraw its troops from Ukraine's border. It's the biggest build-up of forces in years.
Our other headlines: Japan says it will dump 1 million tons of nuclear waste into the sea, provoking international condemnation.
China's foreign trade soars nearly 30% in the first quarter, a sign of improving global demand.
And Citroen launches its new flagship vehicle. We'll be talking to the company's CEO. NATO is demanding Russia withdraw its troops from Ukraine's eastern border. Moscow has increased its military presence over recent weeks near the disputed Donbass region and on the territory of Crimea. It's the biggest build-up of forces since 2014.
The White House has described the move as increased aggression. Russia has warned the US to keep its warships away. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Tony Waterman, who is in Brussels for us. So, Tony, we've had some strong words from NATO.
Well, the NATO Secretary General not mincing words today, saying that this troop buildup is unjustified and urging Russia to de-escalate this situation as quickly as possible. Some 80,000 troops have now been massed along that eastern border between Russia and Ukraine and also in Crimea. As you mentioned, this is the biggest troop buildup since that conflict started in 2014. This is a region that has seen almost non-stop conflict since then. Some 13,000 people have died. That's according to UN figures. And these skirmishes have been increasing in recent weeks. There was this ceasefire that was in place, but that was upended last year. And the concern among Western allies is that these skirmishes are now going to become an all-out war. There was an emergency meeting which was held in Brussels today at the NATO headquarters between the Secretary General and also the Ukrainian foreign minister to discuss this matter. The Ukrainian foreign minister urged NATO to intervene. He floated the idea of increased sanctions, perhaps, on Russia, or also some sort of military support. He said, the Ukrainian foreign minister said that prevention would cost a lot less than actually intervening if there was a war.
And Tony, what's next and what's been Russia's response?
Well, the big thing right now is de-escalation. All sides of this conflict right now are saying that they do not want to see a war take place. But in the last hour or so, we heard from Russia accusing the United States and also NATO allies of sending their own troops to the Russian border. The Russian defense minister said 40,000 troops have been moved, along with 15,000 pieces of military equipment. And just in a sign of how urgent this matter is, U.S. Secretary Antony Blinken is back in Brussels. It's his second trip now in just the last month. He also had a meeting with the Ukrainian foreign minister, pledging the U.S.'s support to Ukraine's sovereignty, saying that the U.S., along with Western allies, are concerned with what's happening. Now, from Russia's perspective, they say they're accusing the U.S. and NATO ally countries of turning Ukraine deliberately into a powder keg. They say that these are Russian troops. They're still in Russia. They have a right to be in Russia.
There's no need to read between the lines. It's plain to see the West is growing increasingly worried that a mass buildup of Russian troops around Ukraine could easily tip from saber-rattling into all-out war.
We're now seeing the largest concentration of Russian forces on Ukraine's borders since 2014. That is of deep concern not only to Ukraine, but to the United States and indeed to many of our allies and partners.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken back in Brussels, his second trip in a month, meeting with the Ukrainian foreign minister and NATO allies for emergency talks. Skirmishes between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists have intensified in recent weeks. Since mid-March, the Kremlin has reportedly massed more than 80,000 troops along Ukraine's eastern border and in Crimea. This Sky News video shows a Russian camp set up 260 kilometers from the Ukraine border. Close by, a military field camp has been erected.
Russia's considerable military buildup is unjustified, unexplained, and deeply concerning.
On Tuesday, Ukraine's foreign minister urged NATO to intervene, floating the idea of more sanctions and military support.
The price of prevention will still be lower than the price of stopping the war.
Russia denies it wants war, but its intentions are unclear. Some speculate the buildup is a distraction from the failing health of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Others think it's a test for U.S. President Joe Biden. Either way, Russia shows no signs of backing down. On Tuesday, accusing Washington and other NATO countries of deliberately turning Ukraine into a powder keg. The Russian foreign minister questioned Washington's motives in the Black Sea, where U.S. warships are due to arrive any day.
What is the United States doing with their ships and military personnel, constantly organizing some kind of activity along the lines of NATO in Ukraine, thousands of kilometers from their own territory? That question remains unanswered.
As tensions mount, the U.S. on Tuesday pledged to deploy an additional 500 troops to Germany as soon as this fall. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who is also in Europe this week, said these forces would help prevent conflict and, if necessary, fight and win. The Biden administration keen to show it has no intention of cozying up to the Kremlin, and a stark departure from the Trump years. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
The engineering giant Babcock International is to cut 1,000 jobs, most of them in the UK. The company, which is the main contractor on UK submarine bases, says it's reducing management to create a more efficient structure. The firm says the pandemic has caused a 36% hit to its operating profits, but it's confident the UK government's investment in shipbuilding will lead to a more profitable future.
China's market regulator has ordered 34 internet companies to assess their businesses as part of an effort to stamp out anti-competitive behaviour. Firms including Tencent, JD.com and ByteDance have been warned against practices such as forcing vendors to use their platform exclusively. The directive comes days after Alibaba was fined $2.75 billion.
Southeast Asia's biggest ride-hailing and food delivery company, Grab, has agreed to merge with special-purpose acquisition company Altimeter Growth Corp. The deal values Grab at $40 billion, paving the way for a U.S. listing. The merger is the biggest blank check company deal ever.
And food delivery company Just Eat has reported a surge in business across Britain and its other markets. Orders jumped by 79% in the first quarter, nearly double its forecast growth rate. It expects orders to grow for the rest of the year, even as coronavirus restrictions ease.
Japan is facing international condemnation over its plans to release more than 1 million tons of contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant into the sea. The facility was crippled during the 2011 tsunami and is now being decommissioned. The country's prime minister says the move is the only way to help the area recover. Phoebe Amorosoro reports.
It's more than 10 years since this devastating tsunami killed 18,000 people and triggered a meltdown at a nuclear power plant on Japan's east coast. Since then, more than 1 million tons of contaminated water has accumulated at the plant. It's being stored in 1,000 giant tanks, but they're due to fill up next year. The plant's operator, Tokyo Electric Power, says it can't make progress on nuclear decommissioning if it has to keep building more tanks. They're treating the water to remove as much radioactivity as possible in line with national safety standards, and then plan to release it into the sea.
We will make sure to secure the safety level far above the regulation standards and the government will put all its effort into measures against the spread of unfounded harmful rumors.
The government says the process will begin in 2 years, but take decades to complete. The plan has the backing of the International Atomic Energy Agency, but is facing condemnation from Japanese environmental and fishing groups and the wider public.
I thought they must be joking. The Japanese government must be out of their minds to make such a decision.
Japan is also receiving criticism from its international neighbours.
We plan to call for the transparent disclosure and international verification of the overall treatment process of the contaminated water.
Despite doubts and opposition from home and abroad, Japan has unilaterally decided to release the Fukushima nuclear wastewater into the sea before exhausting all safe ways of disposal and without fully consulting with neighbouring countries and the international community.
The move also risks creating negative publicity for Japan ahead of the Olympics. The Games are just 3 months away, and some events are scheduled to be held only 60 kilometres from the power plant. Last month, Japanese athletes carried the Olympic torch through Fukushima in a show of support for the region. The Games are being dubbed the Recovery Olympics here, but with organisers also facing a rising number of COVID-19 infections, there are concerns the latest plans for the power plant will further dampen the recovery spirit. Phoebe Amoroso for CGTN in Tokyo.
China has expressed grave concern over the move, describing Japan's decision as extremely irresponsible.
Japan should re-evaluate the issue and refrain from wantonly discharging the wastewater before reaching consensus with all the stakeholders and the International Atomic Energy Agency through full consultations. China will continue to closely watch the developments together with the international community, and we reserve the right to take further action.
Well, let's talk to Professor M.V. Ramana, who's a nuclear expert from Canada's University of British Columbia. Professor, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the programme. Are people right to be concerned, worried about this?
Yes, indeed. The water that is being discharged contains many radionuclides, radioactive materials, in particular tritium. And tritium is an element that should be of concern because of 2 reasons. One, tritium is just a radioactive variant of hydrogen, and therefore bonds in the form of water. You can get radioactive tritiated water, which can enter the body very easily. Likewise, it can also bond to organic molecules, which can go inside the body very easily. And tritium is also known to be able to cross the placental border. In other words, it can if a woman is pregnant and ingests a certain amount of this liquid, then it can cross into through the placenta into the fetus. And these are all risks which have not been really studied very well, and therefore there's definitely reason for concern about this.
Japanese officials say that the radiation doses from the released water will be very low. Is there such a thing as very low? Is there a threshold dose of radiation that is ever safe?
No, from all we know, there's no threshold below which radiation is safe. All exposure to radiation increases to some extent the health effects on your body, including cancer and a variety of other problems.
So given this, why dump in the water? Why is Japan considering dumping nuclear waste in the ocean? Are there no other alternatives?
There are definitely alternatives. In fact, even the International Atomic Energy Agency and a couple of panels that looked into this considered 5 different options. The simple reason why they chose to dump it in the ocean is that it is the cheapest way to deal with this. Other options are more expensive, and that's not something that the TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, and the Japanese government seem to want to undertake.
It isn't just Japan that has a problem with disposing of nuclear waste, is it? I wonder more generally, what are the implications of disposing of radioactive waste for the energy policies, not just of Japan, but of countries all around the world, including the EU?
Yeah, this problem with the contaminated water and its disposal should remind us that nuclear waste is extremely hazardous and is not something we know how to deal with. There is no demonstrated safe solution to dealing with nuclear waste in the long term. Tritium actually in some ways is an easier element to deal with because it has a half-life of only about 12 years. There are other radioactive waste products that have half-lives, which means that they are going to be radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years to even a million years. And there is no demonstrated solution dealing with this. So the implication of that for energy policies in other countries should be that we don't want to be dealing with this material. If we don't want to be dealing with this material, then should we be producing it in the first place? And it's particularly ironic that countries like China and South Korea, and China in particular, which is building up nuclear power plants, is concerned about this issue, but is continuing to build up its nuclear power plants. And because many of these nuclear power plants that China is building are on the ocean, and if one of them were to have an accident, China would be faced with a very similar consideration and having to deal with this very difficult problem. So it should be thinking about this possibility and changing its energy policies accordingly. And likewise, I think an even greater concern could be if China or other countries were to build nuclear power plants inland, away from the ocean, near some of the large water bodies such as rivers and lakes, because in that case, even the idea that you can release this kind of radioactive materials into the water body becomes harder to deal with. In the ocean, at least, you can say it can get diluted, but in a large water body, let's say a river, you would be contaminating downstream areas.
Professor Romana, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. Good to talk to you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, another shot in the arm. The Moderna vaccine is rolled out across the UK as the country meets its latest target.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
China's foreign trade surged almost 30% in the first quarter of this year. The continued recovery of the world's second largest economy signals improving global demand as the world's vaccination program gains pace. Cui Huiao reports.
China's foreign trade is back in business. Foreign trade in the first quarter of 2021 surged by 29%, a significant boost as it's grown by 1/5 compared with data as far back as 2019. Exports grew by nearly 40% from last year, while imports increased by nearly 20%.
Global trade recovery is a major reason behind this growth. For instance, the Purchasing Managers Index of America, the EU, and Japan have all picked up, which led to China's export growth. China's domestic recovery and epidemic control also provided support.
In terms of specific products, imports of corn and wheat have surged compared to last year's data. Among exports, electromechanical products grew fast, making up 60% of the country's total exports. Last year, China signed the RCEP trade agreement with 14 nations, forming the world's largest free trade bloc. In the first quarter, China's trade with its RCEP trading partners grew by 23%.
Export growth comes mainly from a surge in exports in integrated circuits and automatic data processing equipment. China's imports of iron ore grew by over 60%.
Last year, global trading goods fell 5.3% due to the pandemic. The WTO predicts it could bounce back by 8% this year. But Li says China's trade still faces many uncertainties as COVID-19 continues to ravage many countries.
External factors could still affect China's foreign trade, not just the pandemic, but also unexpected situations such as the recent blockage of the Suez Canal, which affected international logistics in the short term.
Analysts expect China's foreign trade to continue the upward streak in the second quarter, but say growth rates could pare down due to geopolitical risks and rising costs for raw materials. Cao Huiyao, CGTN, Beijing.
The UK economy also had some positive news, returning to growth in February despite COVID restrictions. Gross domestic product expanded 0.4% compared with the previous month. Post-Brexit trade with the European Union also improved. Official figures show exports to the EU jumped by 46.6% following January's record slump of 42% as firms struggled with the new rules. Analysts also point out that the data shows that the UK economy is still 7.8% below the level it was at before the pandemic. There are concerns that key sectors such as retail and hospitality may have suffered long-term damage from 3 consecutive lockdowns. Let's talk now to our correspondent Andrew Wilson. So, Andrew, are the latest figures a surprise?
Well, I think the one you read out was probably of most interest is that the UK economy is still 7.8% smaller than it was this time last year. So the overall macro picture is still one of an economy badly needing recovery. But January was a dramatic month. Now, January was always going to be a dramatic month. The first month of Brexit restrictions, the first month where businesses took stock of how they were going to cope with Brexit. So the first thing to mention about January is that a lot of large companies stockpiled a lot of their goods, sending them early in December or hanging on till February before sending them to clients. In other words, a deliberate slowdown of traffic in January because companies were nervous about what January would mean for them. Now, that's obviously quite relevant indeed to the figures, but analysts, of course, are wasting no time in talking this up as signs of confidence in the economy, and it's also firming up economists' predictions that the second quarter is going to be a healthy one for the UK economy. But you must bear in mind the UK economy grew by something like 0.4% in February, and even that's short of predictions. People thought that by and large the city thought that the economy might grow by 0.6%, but then you factor in the lockdown. So it's not just a Brexit story, it's a pandemic story as well.
But when it comes to Brexit, we've seen the trade with the EU, post-Brexit trade with the EU improving. So does it mean that Brexit is going better than its critics expected?
There will be plenty of Brexiteers who will be saying now exactly that. And there'll be plenty of ministers in the government amongst them saying, look, you see, all this was far too much anxiety over far too little. We're now back on course. Of course, it's been a difficult time, but the numbers are starting to climb. And sooner or later, we're going to see things coming back to something much more manageable and positive for the UK. That's probably too simplistic an argument. Bear in mind that those companies that did, as I said before, stockpile their goods were mostly companies supplying non-perishable items like machinery and chemicals and car parts and so on. The perishable goods sector has had much harder time of it. Those companies, the ones that send food products and flowers and plants and so on in and out of Europe, they are having a much more difficult time and are still complaining of being swamped by Brexit paperwork. Also, still, the Federation of Small Businesses is still asking for more help from the government and a swifter decision about how to deal with the paperwork, bearing in mind, and they say, a fifth of small businesses in the UK have still temporarily halted all business with the European Union. So it's being divided up sector by sector. And then you factor in the pandemic itself, and then you look at the retail sector within the UK. And that's a wholly different story again. John Lewis and Debenhams, large department stores that have been hit really badly by the pandemic. But then other stores that have been more flexible, have done more business online, have started to thrive. So there are plenty of other different stimuli and data for economists to look at before they can comfortably say that Brexit is past and it's all going to be plain sailing from now on.
And Andrew, when it comes to consumer spending, lockdowns here are now easing, and for many COVID-wary Brits, the party and the spending might be just beginning.
Really interesting. I remember the comments from the Deputy Medical Advisor to the government, Professor Van Tam, Jonathan Van Tam, who in June last year said in his appeal to the public, we are lifting the lockdown, please don't, as he said, tear the pants out of it. In other words, be respectful of the risks that are still around. And we saw these seeds now in cities and towns up and down the UK last night, particularly, of course, Soho in central London, but also Manchester and Newcastle and other market towns, anywhere that had a pedestrian area where tables could be put out, people enjoying getting together again in public, enjoying table service while sitting down outside in the open air and celebrating the beginning of the end, perhaps, of this second wave-inspired lockdown. But when journalists went to speak to a lot of these people, what they had to say was, yes, it's great to be out, a wonderful sense of being of freedom again, of being able to get out and meet up with other people again, but they all expressed an element of caution as well. And I think the UK has learnt a lot of lessons since the March lockdown and then the lifting in June 2020, and it's going to be a much more cautious approach towards people stretching their arms and their legs and getting out and enjoying themselves in the open air. There are still a lot of threats out there that people acknowledge. There's an understanding that the vaccine programme has given a lot to the chances of people enjoying something like a fairly free summer now, but it's not everything, and there are certain risks about reinfection. There are worries, of course, about vaccine safety. There's still this concern about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the threats of the Northern Ireland peace process and how that might destabilise the summer in the UK as well. So the UK public is much more sober than it was in the summer last year, and mindful that it needs to take advantage of the new freedoms in terms of mental health and enjoying themselves and having a good summer, but also be mindful that this is a virus that's still very much around abroad and at home and needs to be treated with care.
Andrew, good to talk to you. Andrew Wilson reporting there.
Well, the UK now has a third vaccine in its armoury against coronavirus. The Moderna jab is being distributed across England and Wales as the country looks to continue its pace-setting rollout. But there's still concern over new variants of the virus and a warning that cases are likely to rise again. Nicole Johnston reports.
It's a week of milestones in the UK. All adults aged over 50 have been offered a COVID-19 vaccine. And the government is ready to vaccinate people aged over 45.
For the second doses, over 99% of those invited for their second dose have taken it up. So going amazingly well at the moment. Big question is what happens when you get into younger adults? Busy lives, not directly at risk, many of them themselves, or don't perceive to be. So that will be the litmus test.
And on Monday, shops and outdoor dining opened up. Central London's Soho area was packed with people finally coming out of a lockdown that's lasted more than 3 months. And long queues of shoppers formed, ready to spend their savings after being stuck at home.
Yes, of course, the vaccination programme has helped, but the bulk of the work in reducing the disease has been done by the lockdown. So, as we unlock, the result will inevitably be that we will see more infection. Sadly, we will see more hospitalisation and deaths.
But in South London, public health experts are trying to contain an outbreak of the COVID-19 variant first identified in South Africa. Studies suggest the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine
is less effective against the variant.
The biggest threat is a new variant that is an escape mutant. So it challenges our vaccine programs. All the vaccines are being further developed now to contribute to booster campaigns for the older, more vulnerable in the autumn. But I fully expect we'll see cases again.
So today you're having the Moderna vaccine?
Until then, the aim is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. The Moderna vaccine is now being used in the UK as well, alongside AstraZeneca and Pfizer. So despite suffering the 5th highest death toll for COVID-19 globally, when it comes to vaccinations, the UK has one of the fastest rollouts in the world. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Health agencies in the United States have called for an immediate pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine after 6 women who received the jab developed blood clots. 1 woman died and a second is in hospital in a critical condition. The authorities say they're acting out of an abundance of caution in calling for this suspension. Nearly 7 million people in the United States have been given the single-dose vaccine.
The German government is preparing to overhaul the country's pandemic laws to help deal with the 3rd wave of COVID-19. The change comes as senior lawmakers say inconsistent lockdown rules are contributing to the rising number of cases. Trent Murray reports from Frankfurt.
Chancellor Angela Merkel is one step closer to taking complete control of Germany's coronavirus response. Her cabinet has officially signed off plans to amend the country's pandemic laws. The change would enable Merkel to wrestle control of lockdown rules away from state leaders and instead implement a clear, consistent strategy nationwide. The move is both significant and for some controversial. Given its dark history, modern Germany has long cherished the separation of powers that exist between different levels of government and supported the idea that state leaders should be the ones to decide what happens at a state level. But supporters of the new changes say that the 3rd wave of COVID-19 has exposed weaknesses in the system, with the current crop of rules varying widely from state to state. But Angela Merkel wants to put an end to that, giving herself authority to enforce a short, sharp lockdown, which could include the closure of schools, testing in workplaces, and even a nighttime curfew.
All of these measures serve a single goal, the goal of getting our whole country out of this phase of increasing infections, busy intensive care units, and the startlingly high daily number of coronavirus deaths. We have already managed to reduce the number of infections to a controllable level through consistent action in the past, and we can and will succeed again.
Her proposals still need to go to Parliament, but with her coalition government enjoying a sizable majority, they are expected to easily pass. And with them, Merkel will likely move quickly, not just to reverse recent reopenings, but also to shut down large swathes of Europe's biggest economy. Trent Murray, CGTN, Frankfurt.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead is the world's biggest cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin prices are soaring as traders eye a landmark listing. We're live in New York next.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination program offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, Ricky, loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. NATO is demanding Russia withdraw its troops from Ukraine's border. The military presence is the biggest build-up of forces since 2014.
Our other headlines: Japan says it will dump 1 million tons of nuclear waste into the sea, provoking international condemnation.
And China's foreign trade soars nearly 30% in the first quarter, a sign of improving global demand.
About 40 people have been arrested in Minneapolis during a second night of unrest. The violence began after the police fatally shot an unarmed black man. The police say 20-year-old Daunte Wright died after an officer mistook a gun for a taser. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dan Williams in Minneapolis. Dan, another day of unrest. This isn't going away, is it?
No, that's right. As you say, yes, the second night of unrest, that taking place just some 15 kilometres away from this courthouse that's behind me here. This is the trial of Derek Chauvin that's taking place here. But as I say, 15 kilometres away. The focal point there is Brooklyn Center, and that is where we saw police battling once again with protesters. Protesters breaking a curfew that was put in place at 7 o'clock local time, throwing objects at police, and police returning with tear gas and also with flash grenades as well. Dozens arrested there, and of course it all follows the shooting of and death of Daunte Wright, who was arrested on Sunday following a traffic violation. There was then a struggle, and then the 26-year-old veteran of the force, Kim Potter, has been named as the officer who she says she was reaching what she thought was her taser and instead pulled out a handgun and shooting Wright. He drove a couple of blocks before crashing, and we have then seen, of course, the events of the last couple of days since then, and it really has just thrown more tinder on the fire following the death of George Floyd last May.
Tensions are already high in that city because it's where George Floyd was killed nearly a year ago. What's the latest from court in the murder trial?
Yes, so the prosecution today, they rested their case. That's after some 11 days and some 38 witnesses. And it's now the turn of the defence. And a lot of their focus so far, and it's of course still very early in this defence case, but so far a lot of their focus has been on George Floyd's previous arrests and his drug use. We heard from Scott Creighton, a retired police officer who was talking about an arrest he made back in May 6th, 2019 of George Floyd, where he says Floyd was unresponsive and was non-compliant back then. And we also then heard from Michelle Masson, who's a retired paramedic who attended to Floyd back then. Floyd, she says, told her that he was addicted to opioids, that he had high blood pressure, that he was then taken to a hospital and not to prison during that encounter back in 2019. But the prosecution in cross-examination saying that Floyd was compliant and he didn't have heart issues. Now, the Judge Cahill here also allowing this evidence of this previous encounter with police to be admitted, but only on a limited basis, telling the jury that this cannot in some way reflect on Floyd's character. As I say, this is a trial that's expected to wrap up this week with final arguments on Monday. But given all that we've seen over the last couple of days, of course, tensions running high.
Dan Williams in Minneapolis, thank you very much.
It's the world's biggest cryptocurrency, and it's finding its place in the mainstream. Bitcoin prices soared ahead of a landmark IPO in New York on Wednesday. Let's talk to CGTN's John Terrett, who's in New York. Hello to you, John. So tell us more about what's boosting Bitcoin.
Well, Robin and Jamie, I'll tell you, it's a company called Coinbase. Now, you haven't heard of Coinbase, but that's okay, because I have. I'm going to tell you all about them. They're based in San Francisco, formed in 2012, and it's a remote company. You know, several companies I can think of these days, they don't have any headquarters. There's nowhere to actually go and be in the company of other people who work for the company. An example of that would be Salesforce. They don't have much of a headquarters. Robinhood, you know, the people that got involved with the GameStop issue a couple of weeks ago. And in the UK, Boom Radio. All these are new companies. They have no headquarters. They only exist really online. And Coinbase is one of those. And what it is a cryptocurrency exchange. So they will help you buy and sell cryptocurrencies in many different genres and to invest in them and that sort of thing. Now, the big news is that Coinbase is going to debut here in New York, not here, but at the NASDAQ in Times Square in about 24 hours from now. And because of that, within the last week, they gave us through the SEC, the leading regulator, their estimate of where their earnings would have been had they actually been trading on the stock market for the first quarter. And they said that their revenue was up 906% in their first quarter, and the trading volume was $335 billion, up 60% from the year before. And they said that they had 56 million verified customers. Now, on Wall Street, people are going, 56 million, really? We don't think so. But anyway, they've said it, so we have to believe them. And of course, it may well be true, because these bitcoins, these cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin and the many others that exist do seem to be the fad of the moment. Now, what is interesting is that the company is estimated to be based at around $100 billion now, estimated to be worth about $100 billion. And because there's so much money in the system at the moment, it could go to double that when it debuts tomorrow at the NASDAQ. So we'll just have to wait and see. I will say this, though, in its defense. At least, unlike many other IPOs in recent years, at least the company is profitable. So I guess that's a good thing. Robin?
And John, you say cryptocurrencies are the fad of the moment, but not everyone is a fan, though.
No, far from it. And I'll tell you this, I know somebody, a friend of mine, not me, it really is not me, who bought a Bitcoin for $6,000. So he loves it because he's 10 times more than he had when he bought it a couple of years ago. Companies like Visa and Tesla will allow you to buy products and pay off your credit card with these cryptocurrencies if you want. Mark Cuban is a very well-known businessman here. He's been talking up cryptocurrencies and is partly responsible for boosting them recently, along with Elon Musk of Tesla. But Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, links them to terrorism money. Only today, a man who should know, Michael Morrell, who rose to the rank of Deputy Director CIA, says that the use of illicit money in these cryptocurrencies is overdone. However, he says blockchain, which they're based on, actually helps fight crime. So we'll have to see. Anyway, at the moment, Bitcoin stands at $63,296.70 per Bitcoin. Thank you, Coinbase. Robin?
John Terrett in New York. Many thanks.
Citroen is launching its new flagship C5X model, made in China. The car, which is a cross between a sedan, a station wagon and an SUV, should go on sale in the second half of the year in Chinese and European markets. The group's global chief executive, Vincent Kobe, spoke to CGTN's Xie Cheng, who began by asking him about how consumer demand is changing all around the world.
As you know, the European regulation, but beyond the regulation, the European customers are asking for more and more environmentally friendly technologies and therefore transportation modes. So this has been going on for 5 to 10 years and has been accelerating very substantially in 2020 and continue doing so until 2025 for sure. So in that perspective, Citroen has introduced 6 electrified vehicles during 2020, and we will continue with electrified solutions in 2021 and the years to come. In the case of C5X, we will offer in Europe a plug-in hybrid solution as, I would say, the mainstream powertrain for C5X, and will continue refining this technology and its capabilities in the years to come.
Can SUVs ever be green? Because in America and parts of Europe, SUVs are being shunned. And in the launch of Citroen's SUV, is it going to make the company look behind the times?
We've seen in many markets around the world, I would even say in all markets around the world, the emergence of SUVs for the last 10 years or so. There could be a question about, is that going to be the only body type of the future? And we in Citroen think no. A number of customers will be looking for more fluid silhouettes, for more efficient transport, as well as for more elegance, as well as comfort. And in that particular dimension, we think C5X is a very interesting answer.
And the COVID-19 has, of course, taken a toll on the global supply chain, and automakers are pretty sensitive to supply chain disruptions. What is your recovery strategy here?
Well, I think what's fair to say is a number of aspects. First, the car industry, and Stellantis in particular, have become extremely agile with a succession of supply crises in the last 10 years. So we've been able to adjust, adapt, react extremely quickly, both in terms of demand reduction, but also in terms of rebound. Moving forward, I think it's quite important that we adjust the offer to the new norms of society, the value of individual mobility, the environmental responsibility, as well as a bit of a chaotic nature of demand. Also, we think it's quite important that the brands have a very clear message about what is it they stand for, not only in terms of environmental responsibility, but also in terms of customer care, in terms of well-being in general, which are going to become more and more important values for our customers.
There's also a shortage of semiconductor globally. How is that affecting Citroen? And would you like to see governments invest in European chip production to sort of move away from such reliance on Asia?
You know, the current supply shortage of electronic chips is affecting the whole auto industry and beyond the auto industry. In this, we are reacting on a daily basis, protecting manufacturing capacity, protecting above anything else customer orders, and ensuring that we deliver our customers in the best possible way. The midterm impact is a bit early for me to predict, but this is one more crisis, I would say, in many crises we've experienced in the last 10 years. So I'm quite confident we'll react positively.
And let's talk about China. You know, Chinese drivers account for a big percentage of global car sales. How important is this market for Citroen, and what can we expect from you going forward?
I guess you know Citroen has a very, very long history in China. This is a market for which we have a very firm and strong ambition to continue our presence and grow. And we really believe that when you look at the new Chinese customer, what we call the young elites, they're very keen on experiencing strong value-based culture. And we believe Citroen has a very interesting role to play in this particular domain.
The US military presence in Germany is to be expanded by 500 troops. The US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said it was part of a reversal of large-scale cuts ordered by the Trump administration. Germany's defense minister welcomed the announcement as a strong signal of a healthy US-German relationship.
China has lodged what it calls stern representations with the United States after Washington deepened diplomatic ties with Taiwan. The U.S. State Department says it made the decision following an increase in Chinese military activity around the island. China's foreign ministry said the U.S. should not play with fire.
Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has unveiled a draft plan on changes to the city's electoral system. Inciting people not to vote or to cast blank or invalid votes would be made illegal. Other changes include the redrawing of constituencies, which critics say would favour pro-Beijing candidates. Lam says the changes will make sure Hong Kong is governed by so-called patriots.
The Hong Kong activist Joshua Wong has been sentenced to 4 months in jail under a national security legislation. Charges include unauthorised assembly and violating an anti-mask law. He pleaded guilty to both charges.
Iran says it has restarted its 60% uranium enrichment program following an attack on its main facility. The move comes as the United States works to re-enter a nuclear agreement with Tehran. It hopes to limit the country's enrichment of uranium in exchange for the easing of sanctions.
Nearly 2 billion Muslims are celebrating the start of the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, facing COVID restrictions for a second consecutive year. During Ramadan, Muslims abstain from food and drink during daylight hours and rededicate themselves to their faith.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. All aboard. Madrid's doctors and nurses protest against their working conditions.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Doctors and nurses in Spain have come up with a creative way to raise awareness of the difficult conditions they're working under.
They've commissioned an open-top bus tour that takes people around Madrid's overcrowded hospitals and clinics. Rahul Pathak reports.
This is an open-top bus tour of Madrid with a difference. No holidaymakers, just health workers and the media. A chance to make their voices heard on a tour that not everyone will want to see. A year of street protests by healthcare unions have yielded precious little for the organisers, so now they've changed their tactics. Now this bus tour, instead of taking into sites, is actually taking us to 4 primary healthcare centres. The organisers say it's to highlight the near impossible working conditions that healthcare professionals are facing.
Our main problem is that there are simply too many patients to take care of. This area is very demanding. Right now, we don't have enough doctors. 2 doctors are sick, so it's 2 positions that haven't been filled. In addition, we also have 2 paediatric positions also unfilled. So staff-wise, this is a big structural loss for us.
These past 12 months, there have been countless protests by the various healthcare unions. Last year, we had nurses demonstrating in Puerta del Sol. A few months ago, doctors were on the march in Madrid city centre. And just a few weeks ago, healthcare workers used mannequins to highlight the acute shortage of medical staff in Madrid. So the organisers have come up with a slightly unusual approach in an effort to get their message across.
We thought the bus would be a good visual way to show the major problems in Madrid's primary healthcare system.
We can highlight the problems that patients and doctors suffer in different areas of Madrid. That's why we're visiting 4 different centres, each one an example of the deficiencies in the system.
The regional government in Madrid say these demonstrations are politically motivated and not about improving the working conditions of healthcare staff. These primary healthcare workers clearly feel different. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Well, as summer approaches and some lockdowns ease, many of us are desperate for a sunny getaway, a holiday. But this pandemic is far from over, and restrictions are, of course, still in place all around the world. The Dutch holiday operator Sunweb is testing the waters with an experimental trip to Rhodes. CGTN's Stefan de Vries reports now from Amsterdam.
Almost 200 lucky people are gathering at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport to go on a vacation to the Greek island of Rhodes. The travellers are part of a test by Dutch tour operator Sunweb to see if it's safe to travel again. It is not your usual holiday, explains Sunweb's CEO.
It differs almost in everything for a normal trip. It starts that they have to do a PCR test 72 hours before departure, and then they had to do another rapid test.
Thousands of people trying to get in, yet only 187 could finally go on the trip.
We were really afraid that maybe nobody would apply, and we were really surprised and a bit caught off guard when more than 25,000 people in the end registered.
Participants paid $475 for all-inclusive access to the pool, restaurants and other facilities, but nothing else, not even the beach. They have to respect the 1.5-meter social distancing and wear a face mask, but that doesn't seem to bother holiday goers.
Well, that's all we can get right now, so we will enjoy it. Yeah.
Very happy. Been a long time since we've been on holiday. So let's see if we can enjoy it even with the restrictions we have.
At the end of the holiday, there are still some more rules to respect.
And then when they go back, again, there is a PCR test 72 hours before departure and another rapid test on the airport. And then at home, they have to go 10 days in self-quarantine unless they test 5 days after arrival and the outcome is negative, then they can go out again.
It may all sound complicated, but if this test goes well, European holidays could be back again.
And we're all hoping that this summer will at least bring the start of that rebound we've seen in other places in the world, like in China, like in the US, and hopefully we'll see the same here in Europe.
Stefan de Vries, CGTN, Amsterdam.
Yesterday, we reported on restaurant owners in Italy protesting over the impact of lockdown on their businesses. Now, one restaurateur in Kosovo is staging a rather unusual demonstration. He's filled the eatery in the centre of Pristina with mannequins, all smartly dressed for dinner. He says it's the only way he can fill seats as the ban on eating out continues. More at europe.cgtn.com.
The headlines again. NATO is demanding Russia withdraw its troops from Ukraine's border. The military presence is the biggest build-up of forces since 2014.
Japan says it will dump 1 million tons of nuclear waste into the sea, provoking international condemnation.
And China's foreign trade soars nearly 30% in the first quarter, a sign of improving global demand.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.